This is my UFC on Fox preview of the co-main event of Dan Henderson going up against Gegard Mousasi, and pretty much both these men coming off a loss. Honestly, I didn't even know Dan Henderson was fighting on this card. It was, I think, this week when I finally actually looked at the card that I realized that Dan Henderson was fighting. I didn't know anything about this card other than the main event of Anthony Rebel Johnson going up against Alexander Gustafsson. I thought this was a one-match show pretty much, and everything else in the other undercard was filler. But Dan Henderson fighting Gegard Mousasi, man, in the co-main event on Fox, this seems like a rare thing of Dan Henderson being a co-main event on a TV special versus him being the actual main event. But Dan Henderson losing 4 out of his last 5 fights. His last fight against Daniel Cormier, he got demolished. He got destroyed. Also, Gegard Mousasi coming off a loss also in his last fight. So both these guys coming off a loss. Dan Henderson is obviously the elder of the two. And I do think Gegard Mousasi is going to beat up Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson just looked horrible. Just got horribly destroyed in his last fight by Daniel Cormier's wrestling and his ground and pound. And I think Gegard Mousasi has the will and power to pretty much knock out Dan Henderson. I know it's going to be a sad ordeal seeing Dan Henderson getting beat like we saw many of the greats like BJ Penn, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, even Mark Coleman when he fought Couture, and just Chuck Liddell, you could name it. I think pretty much Dan Henderson's going to be just like all of them. I think he's going to get knocked out probably in the first round. If he doesn't, I think if he can knock out Gegard Mousasi, I think it has to be the first round. I think the later this fight goes, Gegard Mousasi obviously going to have the advantage over the speed and the endurance, and Dan Henderson not so much. So I'm gonna pick Gegard Mousasi to win this fight. But if Dan Henderson does have a fighting chance to be that one knockout punch we've seen countless times in his fights, and obviously the most famous one I think is to get one at UFC 100 against Michael Bisping, knocked out cold, hit him with that punch, and then hit him for one more time for good measure, and that was it. But Dan Henderson, I think, will not beat Gegard Mousasi, and I do think Gegard Mousasi will knock out Dan Henderson in the first round. And there you have it. I do not see this fight going 3 rounds, and if I do, I don't think it'll be a fun fight to watch for 3 rounds. So there you have it, Gegard Mousasi to win by first round knockout.